Episode 52, Sports Card Self-Help Therapy Session Bonus. Hey Alexa, what's the meaning of self-therapy?
Self-therapy is a term used to describe the process of treating oneself through therapy, which focuses on helping individuals develop a strong sense of self, explore their feelings, find meaning, and identify their strengths.
Okay, so that's my intro to this episode. In case you didn't hear it, because I don't know if the microphone actually captured it, because the Alexa device is a few feet away from the mic. The Merriam-Webster dictionary meaning is that self therapy is a therapeutic treatment of oneself, especially for the purpose of coping with one's personal or emotional problems. Okay, so I'm recording this Monday evening, November 20th, 3 days after something happened in the hobby that I have been ruminating over, thinking over and over, trying to figure out what I think about all of it. And to be honest, I'm still processing. I'm still digesting it, and I realized I really want to get my thoughts out in podcast form. But even that decision, to make this podcast episode and to write out my, thoughts and talking points, I debated back and forth whether I should even make this into an episode because, I was in the back of my mind, I had the detractors, people who would think that I'm doing it for likes and listens and clout or whatever it is, like some ulterior motive. But I don't know if people will take me for my word, but I genuinely, everything I do, what I do is make content for myself, an audience of one. And I know some people are like, well, if that's the case, just record it and don't publish it out. Yeah, I have an audience, I have a small platform. And what I think, I'm hoping that what I say maybe helps other people make sense of what's going on. Because to me, this is a big moment in the hobby. The card porn thing was, the Showwave vlogs thing was as well. But I'm gonna get to why those don't mean as much to me personally as this particular situation does. And not having the rigidity of my chapter episodes in my podcast, it does allow me to talk about current events in the hobby. And so my podcast is my way of processing my thoughts and feelings, and it is about my hobby journey. Yes, I know I keep saying my, but that's I've never purported to be anything different. So I don't believe this is clickbait. This is not performative. But I also understand that people will say it, may take it that way. But I'm going to say up front right now, this episode, I think it's going to be episode 52. This is a monologue episode, and I am going to be talking about the megabid, shillbid situation with who I considered a mentor and a friend in the hobby, Rob G, the sports card therapist. So if you don't want to hear this topic or this episode, and you think this is all drama, this is your time to just turn this off. I have a great catalog of episodes in the past, and I hope that I have some really good ones kind of coming up in the future. I still haven't published the part 2 with the great curator because I have, I had the Veterans Day special. I had the football game I went to with my friend who was outside of the hobby. So I wanted to publish those out real quick. So I'm gonna get to that, but it's always something, right? So um, you know, it's okay. It's okay if you don't listen to this episode. So, but for those of you who do want to hear my thoughts on all of this and you're trying to make sense of all of this, let's keep going. And so please allow me to provide some background and also take a moment to say thank you for listening. Would love to hear what you think about it. Some of you are very good at giving me, you know, praise or constructive criticism, and I welcome it. You can find me on Instagram at Denny_cards, which I don't always plug or mention. I should probably do that more. I don't know. But I feel like if you're listening to this, you likely do follow me on Instagram. And I guess I do have a hobby a podcast email, hobbysthompson@gmail.com. I just don't check it that much. No one emails me at it. Let's just say that. I do get push notifications. Um, but I digress. What did I want to say? Oh, right. If you are Rob or any member of his Wolfpack network and you're listening to this, I want to thank you as well. And I hope that I kind of provide all this information in a somewhat objective or even keeled way, but I'm going to bring a lot of my own personal uh, feelings into this. So maybe that's merely aspirational. But okay, so I'm going to pause here because, again, this is your moment to stop listening if you don't want to listen to the contents of what I've just explained. Okay, so let me take a break, and we'll be right back. Okay, so when I started down this path back into the hobby last year in the fall of 2022, I consumed as much content as I could, like a sponge. And the very first podcast I listened to and really binged was Rob's podcast, Sport Card, the Sports Card Therapist. I listened to no lie. I mean, and I remember telling him this, which was I listened to his first 100 episodes in a matter of about 6 weeks. I know it was more than a month, but it was less than two, somewhere around that area. And I credit his podcast and him with my acceleration of knowledge in the hobby, again, which I've mentioned to him, giving him his flowers. And I remember even last Christmas, Christmas of 2022, I even sent him a modest care package of cards. Um, just realized modest, pardon the pun. Uh, Not a pun, but didn't mean to say, well, okay, modest cards collection broke this situation. So modest care package of cards, but you know, it was just a small token of appreciation. Of cards, of players he mentioned that he PC'd. And I also did that for a couple of other podcasters. Again, mainly as a thank you since podcasts are free. And I just had these cards laying around that were from, back when I was in the hobby from 2007 to 2012, which again was a time when I didn't listen to podcasts. I wasn't in social media. And, it was kind of like a lonely time for me back then in the hobby. So I loved all the content and just it was a different new landscape and for better or worse, but I really enjoyed it. And by the way, I'm not saying this because I want anyone to send me gifts for this podcast. Please do not think that I brought that up for that reason. The reason I bring it up is because I will admit I fell into this trap of, or I don't know if trap's the right word, but I entered into a parasocial relationship, which is something that I've talked about in the past, right? I was the one who mentioned that people generally tend to feel closer to content creators or influencers or social media people or celebrities or athletes or whatever because we're the ones who get wrapped up and watch them and listen to them and we get attached to them. And so I was the one back when I was the content consumer and not the content producer. I was the one who felt as if Rob was close to me when he had no clue who I was. And so I was, to put it simply, and I will admit it, I was a fanboy. I was a fanboy of Rob's podcast. And so that's why when he asked me to be on his podcast, again, after me reaching out and tagging him and being like, wow, look at this. And like, I've learned so much. And I was, putting in my stories back when I like, didn't really know how content worked. Still kind of don't, but, I'm better at it, I guess. But, I would like quote his podcast because I was like, man, there's some real good gold in here. And I didn't do it with any motive or wanting to, you know, get on his radar to be on his podcast. But I did it from genuine appreciation. And so that is why when he did ask me to be on his podcast for a roundtable for collectors, and this was, I think, like February of 2023, I was absolutely elated. I was honored. I was like, "Oh my gosh," like that would mark at that time my first time on a hobby podcast, and it just so happens to be with the guy who I thought had the best podcast in the hobby because it was about cards, but also life. Because as he says, he sprinkles in some self care. Which, by the way, it's now that I say that out loud, I it's funny that more recently and later on from that time, he it was like post national. He said to me like, "Hey, keep it about the cards." But it's funny that it was him and his talk that wasn't about the cards that really resonated with me. Just the psychology behind the cards, what the cards meant, and like just his journey, and him setting up as a dealer. That's when I was like, hey, what if I set up as a dealer? And so I just tried that when I really should not have. But I also know that I've been inspirational to some people to set up as dealers or have their own podcasts, and some of them let me know, and and I appreciate that, and some people don't, and that's fine too. But yeah, that's kind of like how I felt is, wow, like I have this connection with Rob through his content because I've binged it. I've like listened to it so much. And so when he asked me another time to be on his podcast for something that was, I guess, akin to the hobby podcast version of Around the Horn, which is a show from ESPN after Pardon the Interruption, that or before, yeah, before. And man, I love that hour from ESPN. It was called Around the Hobby, and I loved it. And I met folks from those two episodes that I'm talking about who I still talk to today, and I consider hobby friends. Some of them who might be listening to this show, or maybe not. And as some of you who listen to this podcast know, I had him on two of my episodes back to back, and he was my first two-time guest. And it was about navigating my own thoughts and feelings post national. And so, I was like, man, he's going to be on my podcast. That's so wild, right? So there's this saying that you are the sum, or how does it go? You are the average of the sum of the five most important people in your life. And, whether you subscribe to that theory or saying or not, let's say you do, in my hobby life, Rob was one of those five people. I in the past would DM him about cards and purchases, and I even shopped this very well. Should I even talk about that? Well, I don't edit this podcast clearly. I even shopped this podcast around, and his Wolfpack network was one of the potential landing spots. At least I wanted it to be. Um, and I don't think I've ever shared that in podcast form. And I generally don't like to divulge one-on-one communications or conversations, but I think this paints him in a good light. So, just to end that story, it didn't work out. He declined, but he, in doing so, encouraged me to strike out on my own and do the podcast, which, you know, um, I had the concept, the idea, the podcast, the chapters, the title I was still working on at that time. I think he didn't like the title, but he was encouraging. He was like, "Yeah, do it, man. Go ahead and just start it by yourself, and good luck to you, and let me know how I can help and all that stuff." So, I share all that because he was being a mentor, a podcast mentor. And it's kind of wild to me because I'm not like huge on age, although in Korean and some of these cultures, how old you are is really important because that's how you determine how you speak to someone, like the honorific. So for those of you who understand, you understand. But there's some countries and languages where, yeah, it's very important to know how old, to determine whether someone is older or younger than you. But in American culture, it doesn't really matter. But it is kind of wild that he is younger than me, not by much, but he is. And so I bring that up because it's wild to me. Like, I felt when he told me to strike out on my own, it was like, yes, it was a rejection to not be part of the Wolfpack network per se, but I kind of still took it as a stamp of approval to give this podcast thing a shot, to give it a try. So yeah, I part of me does wonder if this podcast exists if it wasn't for someone like him. So, okay, I think I need to take another break here, gather my thoughts again. So, everything I just said, that is why what happened last week just rocked my hobby core. Um, I took some time away from the hobby last week, which I wanted to talk about in a future episode. Just crazy stuff, not crazy, but like just stuff outside of the hobby. One main thing being that our furnace in my house, the hobby podcast studio basement, all that. The furnace went kaput, and dealing with the financial hit something like that creates, and just all the stress that comes with it as well. But yeah, it wasn't intentional, but I did take time out of the hobby last week, and so I felt like pretty unplugged from the hobby because I'm the type to post almost every single day, and so that's why when I Friday afternoon, after a pretty long bit of just being unplugged from the hobby, I see Rob's face on my feed, and he's in his car and he's talking. And at first, I was trying to figure out, like, how much of this, are there captions to this? There weren't. It was just almost like a live or just unedited raw. And I watched and I listened and I watched and I listened, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is not a 90-second reel. This is like a long, video. And what it ends up being is like a 9-minute apology video about how he shill bid on some Eli Manning cards and tried to explain why. And my immediate reaction after watching this video was to check in on him and give him some encouragement. And like I said, I generally don't like to divulge one on one communication, so I won't say what I said to him or what he said to me. But, I did check in on him on Friday. And yet, I will also admit that I have not since then. And, I'll explain why. Um, because I think that's important, or not like integral, but still somewhat important, maybe. So on Friday, I think I was still in a state of shock and a state of denial. I was in like defense mode, and I was like, man, like, I can't believe this happened, and I wonder if he's okay, and I still wonder that, but I learned more during the weekend, and I watched a video again, and I didn't reach out during the weekend because I wanted to respect the boundaries of family time, and that's really important. And I will admit that I have encroached it in the past with him and others, and for some people it's fine and it's just they don't mind at all. But when someone sets boundaries, you respect them, or I wanted to respect them, so I didn't want to do it again. So I kept my distance, not out of malice, but out of respect. And then during the weekend is when the stage of acceptance, in this grief process, if you can call it that, like hobby grief. But then came the acceptance that this is what indeed happened. And then the next stage, again, I don't know all the stages and all that, but I know denial is one of them, acceptance is another. And then it's like anger, right? That's like the next one, I think. And it's not like real anger, but like it was like hobby anger. And I should also clarify, it wasn't really, not 100%, but it wasn't really like all anger at him, but because I think it was more like disappointment in him, but also like anger at myself because I just realized like I've been putting so much like faith and trust in this one individual, and having that faith and trust broken, just I felt angry at myself. And so that is what ultimately I feel like my post was about in Instagram when I wrote about this. Some people called it a novel. And I have the post up on my phone here as I'm looking at it, and you know just I don't know, I say like you condemn the act, like I condemn the act of shilling, but I'm not condemning the person. And I did write a lot. Um, all right, I should stop reading this. Okay, so where am I? Um, the the main thing I wanted to show with that post, which I'm not going to read verbatim, and that's up if you want to go look at it. It was from November, I guess now 19th or something like that. I don't know. Um, the main thing I wanted to show with that post was compassion and understanding, because I think that's what this podcast is ultimately about. Yes, it's about the hobby. Yes, it's about the cards, but it's about the people. It's about, you know, go, being in shoes of other people to gain a better understanding of how bad their feet hurt when they're walking. Because, oh man, like I totally get, once you're a dealer, you get how hard it is to be a dealer, and maybe you're more understanding. And that's just one example of many. So, the other thing I wanted to convey with that post was that, life is not so cut and dry. It's not all about good and bad, and, that good people do bad things and bad people do good things. I think that's what I said on my post. And, but, even those labels of good people and bad people, like, what do those labels even mean? Right? Like, I don't even know, in hindsight. But, I was trying to be this voice of reason, to not be just another person to kick someone while they're down, to get the pitchforks and tar and feather them and all that. And, I did make it introspective. I said, wow, if I'm ever in those shoes, I hope people can, condemn the act, but not me personally, can separate the person from the act. So I stand by all those words, but I also know another thing, and this is what I realized after I wrote that post, which is when you do put yourself out there as anything, such as an expert or knowledgeable voice in the hobby, not only are other people putting yourself up on that platform or pedestal, but you're also doing that yourself. And I mean, like I said, like I know I did that with Rob in this parasocial relationship manner, but you also do put yourself in a special, set of shoes when you put that therapist title in your name, and you do very much blur the lines between the work and the hobby, because that's his expertise, right? I mean, it's not something I do, but I don't fault him for doing that. I continuously keep separate my boundaries on the two, between the hobby and work, because I don't want those two worlds to meet. But I don't fault someone for doing that. But when you do that, and when you do have the title in their therapist, it's like you're putting yourself out there as such, right? For all the good and bad. And I don't purport to know what therapists do and how they act, but I know I'm not a therapist, but I know that, apologies with attempts to justify, it's the whole like, I'm sorry, but, or I'm sorry that you're upset. It's, those aren't real apologies. And so that's the part that really bums me out, because, like I said earlier, my initial reaction was, this sucks, check in on him, defend. That was my state of denial. Then I watched the video again, and I just realized, for those of you who don't know what any of this is about, and you want to, like, I want to watch this video. If you try to find it, the video no longer exists. The video itself and and Rob's Instagram profile, they've been deleted or temporarily deactivated. I don't know, but you can't find it as of the time of this recording. So I I also put in my post that I can understand as a basic human instinct. We do try to justify our own actions because, again, we are, after all, the heroes. We are the protagonists in our own stories. That's why when we tell stories about our workplace and our, inept colleagues, our husbands, our wives, our friends, they all nod along as we explain to them why, Karen is being a Karen. That we never tell them what we did wrong. We just say, oh, these people, they're terrible, and like it's always what Karen did wrong, or from the office, Toby from accounting. Oh, Toby from accounting, you're the worst. All that. So we become the protagonists, And so I get it. Like, there is a natural, I guess, instinct to want to, you know, justify. And, there is again, I'm not a PR professional, but like, there's this thing in PR, public relations matters. You try to get ahead of the story, control the narrative, say it in your own words. But what happened here is, it was only after, and I mentioned this person earlier, Modest Car Collection, that, he showed his work, he showed his math on how he realized that shill bidding had occurred and who it was and how it was almost like incontrovertible proof. And by the way, it's shill bid, not shill bidded. But who am I to correct anyone? But it was about how Rob was the shill bidder, and the apology video, talking about megabids and talking about how, I did that because I thought other people were shill bidding and trying to explain the term megabid, and it just didn't make sense to me, I guess. Initially it did, and then it didn't. And I was like, wait a minute, like, and then I was reading the comments, and I was like, maybe am I being influenced by the comments, or like, what's going on here, right? So I'm trying to make sense of what's what. But ultimately, it's just my opinion. It wasn't the mega bid that was the issue; it was the non-payment of the winning bid. And I think that there can be different definitions or acts of shill bidding, but to me, and again, this is my personal opinion, that the main definition centers around the act of bidding without the intent to pay. And I know some people think it has to do with, when you bid on your own cards, that's shill bidding, and here that didn't happen. And look, they could be right. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure this out. I'm still trying to learn. I'm not saying I know the true classic definition of shill bidding, and I actually encourage the hobby to talk about it more so that you know, we fully understand this because I don't. I mean, and I would like for more people to know so to do so. But for right now, intent not to pay, that is like the underlying crux for me. Uh, God, I'm getting exhausted talking about this. I'm gonna take another break. All right, gotta get some water. Okay, so during my break, I checked my Instagram DMs and I mentioned to a couple of you who may be listening, shout out to you, you know who you are, that I said that this recording is the most exhausting episode to record. And so, yeah, I imagine that for some of you, this is exhausting to listen to. So I'm going to just try and wrap it up. But, I do feel like this has been indeed therapeutic for me. So at least there's that. Okay, so here's the thing. I did not know card porn, shy away vlogs, and speaking of Instagram DMs, I exchanged some DMs with them here and there, and again, I'm not going to divulge what we've talked about, but I didn't really know them, right? No one really knew what card porn looked like. Maybe they did. The whole like um, Juan Garcia stuff, and then Shay. I know some people who I did know knew him, but it's kind of like second, 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon stuff. But with Rob, yeah, like I said, parasocial relationship. I felt like I knew him, and I talked to him over the phone. I did meet him once in person at the National. I did not go to the Wolfpack Network trade night, which wasn't by design. I really wanted to, but it was the Beckett party, shrimp. It was raining. I enjoyed myself too much at the Beckett party and all that. But yeah, I felt like I knew him, but again, that's my fault, not his. But for me, he was like this voice of reason, right? And that voice of reason did something that was not reasonable, at least to me and to many people. And the titles for his podcast episodes talking about bad actors in the hobby, shill bidding, and so it's to me, it's almost like finding your dentist smoking outside his office, which by the way happened. It totally happened to me as a kid when I was growing up in Queens, New York City. And to this day, I mean, I love my dentist, and but I've definitely been skeptical of dentists since that. That's almost like the baggage I carry with me is like, this dude being like, "Hey, brush your teeth, and when you grow up, don't make your teeth yellow, and don't smoke." And like literally 15 minutes later, after we check out, he's like smoking outside of his office, and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I mean, maybe the term is hypocritical, but I'm not trying to say that Rob is a hypocrite here. I'm really not. But that's the feeling that I get is like, here is this person who I put on this pedestal of he's the voice of reason. And then it's like, wait, what the heck? Like, there's no way he did that, right? So I'm past denial, I'm past acceptance, I'm past, again, the anger, not at him, but really just angry at myself and, just like disappointed at him. Um, and then there's also like this whole private sales of card ladder, right? Like, I don't even get that part, but I know some people are really upset about that. I do think, and I don't think this is a word, but like I said to myself or some people about how I think it's manipulatable. Not manipulative, but it can easily be manipulated. And because private sales, who knows, right? Do you get the bro discount? Is the reporting accurate? I don't even know how all of that works. Okay. But um, I almost don't want to know how it works. but, but ignorance is bliss. Well, even though some people may think ignorance is bliss, we also know that that's not necessarily always true in the hobby, right? Because knowledge is power. And so I guess I do want to know more about that. Like maybe I have, or maybe I ask, and I don't know if they would accept, but maybe I have someone from Card Ladder come on to just talk about that aspect or Card Ladder in general. Like I'm not investigative journalist, but I would like to maybe use this platform to help people understand parts of the hobby more. Um, Rob, I would love. I don't know if he would actually come on this podcast again. I don't know if he ever will, or I hope he does come back. But you know, I have no animosity towards Rob. Again, a lot of what I feel like I felt was through my own doing, was me putting, no one asked me to put faith and trust in him. So I don't harbor any ill will. And I think his general body of work with the podcast was a net positive for the hobby, or at least just that's my personal belief and opinion. And I do hope he comes back to hobby, and I do hope he podcasts in some capacity. I don't know if he would, talk about what happened. Again, it's hard because right, it's like I want to know his mindset in one way, but then the other, I just mentioned about how trying to justify actions is not a real apology. Again, that's just my opinion. But I don't hope that he's driven out by an angry mob created from social media. Um so I don't know, like, if he's listening to this, if card ladder people listen to this, I just want to know more, like in the sense of like, how did the private sales, how does that even work? Because now that that's opened up the can of worms, or now that that door is opened, I want to kind of peek in and go like, what is this about again? So I I don't know. I said I'm going to wrap it up. So I don't know what Rob will do or should do. I would never ask or tell someone what they should do. Yeah, I'll admit I didn't reach out after Friday afternoon because I just feel like I've, again, respecting his boundaries, but then also could have texted or called him today, I guess. But I didn't. I don't know how he's doing. I don't know how. I did check in a little bit on the Wolf Pack, and it just. Again, I'm not going to divulge what we talked about, but it's really like, yeah, just really crappy. This all happened. Um, we're all going to make mistakes. We're all human, but I also now do understand that there are some errors that we as a hobby community generally consider to be a cardinal sin. And here, I think it happens, justification or not. Um, for some people, maybe it wasn't a cardinal sin. I don't know. For some people, maybe it wasn't shill bidding, and that's kind of wild for me to wrap my head around, because to me it's like, how is that not shill bidding? Buy bidding on something without the intent to pay. But some people may think it's called buyer's remorse, or I don't know, right? I don't fully. Again, this was to help me. What is it? The self therapy aspect. I hope it helped someone who's listening to this. You may vehemently disagree, and I get that. Um, but if you do, just it's always better to say why than just I think you're wrong. Like, it's more of like, let's have a conversation about it, because I would like to learn too. I would like to learn more about this. So, I think there's a general saying that the cover up is worse than the crime. Here, I don't think it's really a cover up. I don't think it was worse than the crime. Again, if the crime is cardinal sin, is the cover up worse than the cardinal sin? I don't know. Um, for me though, it's just the way it was handled after the fact. But again, I don't want to like criticize all the moves that happened after. I just know that what happened and the explanations that happened after, just for me under a little bit more scrutiny, just didn't land as well as it did the first time, I guess is the way to put it. So again, it would be best to hear it from the horse's mouth, but I don't know what, when, or if at all, someone like Rob will come onto the podcast to talk about it. But this episode was all about that, and I'm done talking about it. Look, maybe I talk about it again in the future. Maybe I don't. I don't know. But I do generally feel good. Just I feel like a little bit of a weight has been lifted on my shoulders just talking about this. Um, I don't have a good way to end my podcasts. I really should figure something out. But listen, Germany, France, Italy, I love you. So auf Wiedersehen. And oh yeah, in case I don't make another podcast episode until Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there. May you have a fun day and a fun break, extended break if you do get that, for family fun, football, food, all of that. So much love to all of you. I mean, including you, Rob. Really, just much love to everyone. Um, just just have a good time in the hobby and outside of it, and take care of yourselves. All right.